Let's now take a look at independent sources. So, an independent source is a source which publishes its own original story after conducting its own investigations. In other words, any source which does not merely replicate a news report which is published by some other media house, or any source which does not quote another media house as its original source, is considered an independent source. Now let's just take a look at a couple of examples, and hopefully it should make things a little more clear about what constitutes an independent source. So we'll first start with this example. We are trying to verify a media monitor's report which was based on a YouTube video, and the video states that rebels seized control of the Libya-Tunisia border. So this is the report that we have. And now we have done a search, and let's say we come up with two reports, one by Al Jazeera and the other by Reuters. And now we have to assess if these two reports constitute two independent sources. Now, just because we have Al Jazeera and Reuters quoting this particular incident doesn't mean that these are two independent sources. We need to read through the report and try and assess the original source for both Al Jazeera and Reuters, because sometimes it may so happen that Al Jazeera might quote a news story which was originally published by Reuters, in which case Al Jazeera is merely replicating a news story which has already been published, but it is not publishing something which it has investigated on its own. So in this case, if you look at this paragraph which has been highlighted under the Al Jazeera story, you find that it says a Tunisian official said loyalists fled as more than 100 rebels arrived, and it quotes an AFP news agency, an official from the AFP news agency. So this is the source for the Al Jazeera story. And now when we look at the Reuters story, let's just look at the first paragraph, and Reuters basically says that rebels took control of the Ras Jadid border post on Libya's frontier with Tunisia on Friday, etc. And it quotes witnesses here. So in this case, the sources for both these news stories are different, which means that Al Jazeera and Reuters have both conducted their own investigation into this particular incident, and they are reporting their own original news story. So in this case, Al Jazeera and Reuters are considered to be independent sources. Now let's take a look at this report, and this is an example of two sources which are not independent. Now in this case, we are trying to verify a media monitor's report which was based on a text message, and the text message states that Gaddafi had fled to Algeria. Now what we need to try and assess is whether Reuters and Al Jazeera, let's assume these are the two reports which came up when we ran a search for this particular report. Now we need to assess if Reuters and Al Jazeera are independent news sources here. Now let's take a look at the Reuters source first. Now if you look at the first paragraph, it says that 6 Mercedes cars have crossed from Libya into Algeria, and the source here is Egypt's state MENA news agency reported on Saturday. And if you look at Al Jazeera, you look at the first paragraph, then it quotes the same source. It says that Egypt's state MENA news agency quoted a source from the rebel military council, etc., etc. So essentially, even though Reuters and Al Jazeera confirm the fact that Gaddafi had fled to Algeria, the source which is given the news to both Reuters and Al Jazeera is one and the same. So the source here is basically another media house, that is the MENA news agency, which is given this message to Reuters and Al Jazeera. So since Reuters and Al Jazeera are quoting the same media house as their source, we consider Reuters and Al Jazeera in this case to be non-independent sources. So in this case, we can consider only either Reuters or Al Jazeera to be one of the sources that corroborate the report, and we need to find another additional source which corroborates the report, which should be an independent source. So I hope this example has very clearly stated the difference between an independent and a non-independent source and what constitutes an independent source. So please bear in mind that we always need to look at the original source for a particular story. Now, how will we know whether we have properly verified a report? First of all, if a report is an official report, in a sense that if the report is from a credible and reputed organization, from an organization which figures in the list of official organizations that volunteers will be handed over right at the start of the deployment. So if it is an official report, we can automatically verify a report. We needn't wait to corroborate it with other media sources. Now, if a report is not an official report, then we obviously have to try and find two independent news sources that first of all corroborate the media monitor's main claim. We would also need to find sources that rely on credible information sources or take responsibility and accountability themselves for the information that is being reported. So basically, we need to find a news source which first of all either quotes a credible information source from which they take the information from, or these news sources themselves have to take responsibility and accountability for the information that they report. So in other words, if we have a BBC report which says BBC was able to investigate this particular incident and we are able to confirm that such and such a thing happened, then that is BBC taking responsibility for the information that it reports. So these are the kind of things that we need to be on the lookout for. And we also need to find news sources that have absolutely no uncertainty, conveying the accuracy and the credibility of the information being conveyed. So I will explain this point in the next slide. And we also need to find information that is unbiased. Now let's just take a closer look at what those 4 points that we just discussed deal with. First of all, we need to find reports that have absolutely no ambiguity in the information that they convey. So a report is typically not verified if we find a report which has any uncertain language or any unsubstantiated claims. For example, if you come across a news report, even if it is from a very credible and reputed news agency like say the CNN, if the CNN says something like it is believed that these vehicles were carrying military supplies to rebel forces, then we cannot consider that to be a credible news report, because in this case the CNN is not confirming. The CNN is only saying that it believes that there were vehicles carrying military supplies. And then if you come across unconfirmed reports, for example, if you come across a report which says it was impossible to verify the attacks on government troops and it was not immediately clear which group was responsible. Now you have two words here which very clearly show to us that this particular news story does not sufficiently claim credibility or accuracy of the report that is being conveyed. So you have the word impossible and you also have not immediately clear. So these are like certain words we need to be on the lookout for. And then we need to be specifically careful about biased news sources. This is especially true in the case of conflicts. For example, let's say we're dealing with the Syrian context, and we come across a report which says, according to Syrian state media, Syrian security forces did not attack peaceful protesters. Now, even if this news has been reported by, say, a very credible news agency like Reuters or Al Jazeera, despite the fact that we have such credible news agencies reporting it, we would still have to mark the report as unverified, because their original source is the Syrian state media, which could potentially be heavily biased. And then finally, we come across unidentifiable sources. For example, if you have a CNN report which says CNN citing an anonymous source in the Libyan government, in this case CNN is simply citing an anonymous source, and this anonymous source, for all you know, could be heavily biased. So since there's absolutely no way for us to ascertain the credibility of the source, we would have to be careful with this particular report. Now, so these are certain keywords, key aspects that we need to be on the lookout for every time we try and identify media sources to corroborate our original report. So if we contain any report which has any of these uncertain languages or any of these biased or unidentified sources in the report, then we need to be very careful with those, and it would do well for us not to consider these reports to corroborate our original report. So let's just take a look at an example of a verified report. Let's say, for instance, we come across a report which says over 25,000 people were evacuated to shelters due to Hurricane Irene. Now, let's assume that the Media Monitor's news source link leads you to the following website, which is that of the American Red Cross. Now, assuming that the American Red Cross is listed as an official news source or an official organization in the list that you will be handed over right at the start of the deployment, you can directly automatically verify this report. You can just go ahead and mark it as verified. You needn't triangulate it with other media sources. So this is an example of a verified report, and no further analysis is required since this is an official source. Now, here's another example of a verified report. Let's assume you have a report which is based on a Facebook post which states that Libyan rebels have seized Gaddafi's compound in Tripoli. Now, let's say we run a search and we come across these two news sources, one from the NPR and the other from the New York Times, and both these news sources are able to confirm that Libyan rebels have indeed seized Gaddafi's compound in Tripoli. So in this case, we can mark our original report as a verified report because we can find two independent sources that confirm this particular news. Now here is another example of a verified report. Let's assume we come across a report which says 500,000 people have evacuated the low-lying areas of New York City in anticipation of Hurricane Irene. Now, assuming we run a search and we come across two reports, one from Reuters and the other from CNN. Reuters states that 250,000 people evacuated the low-lying areas of New York City, and CNN states that hundreds of thousands were forced to evacuate New York City. Now, in this case, we have both Reuters and CNN confirming that a lot of people evacuated New York City, but the numbers that they talk about does not necessarily tally with the number in the original report. So in this case, do we verify the report or do we mark it unverified because we cannot tally the numbers? Now, in such cases, remember we talked about confirming such numbers within a predefined, pre-accepted range. So we automatically try and assess if the numbers in these two reports, that is by Reuters and CNN, fits in within the acceptable range that is being provided to us right at the start of the deployment. So in this case, assuming that 250,000 and hundreds of thousands of people fits in within the acceptable range which is provided to us at the start of the deployment, we will automatically verify the report. In a lot of cases, it's also advisable to use our own discretion because if you look at this particular report, then the main focus of the report is the fact that there has been large-scale evacuation, and the precise number of evacuees is not really as much concern as the fact that a lot of people have evacuated. Here's an example of an unverified report. This report is based on a YouTube video which states that Hurricane Irene damaged 10 homes in North Carolina a week ago. And in this case, we are able to find only this YouTube video below, and we can't find any other source which can corroborate the fact that 10 homes were damaged in North Carolina. In this case, we mark it an unverified report because we cannot independently verify when or where the footage was shot. We don't really know who the source of the video is, and we also cannot mark this as a revisit because this is a report which came out about a week ago. So this news is pretty old, and it's not really going to be of much relevance now, and there's also not much chance of other media sources picking up a news which happened more than a week ago. So since we are not able to find other media sources which can corroborate this fact, we can very safely say, taking into consideration the fact that this news came out more than a week ago, we can very safely say that this is not a revisit and that this is an unverified report. Now here's an example of a partially verified report. Assuming we have a report which says thousands of people have been evacuated from low-lying areas of New York City in advance of Hurricane Irene, and all shelters are filled beyond capacity. Now, let's assume that this is based on an eyewitness account. Now, we run a search and we come across two reports, one from CNN and the other by the New York Times. And in both reports, we basically come across information which can confirm that thousands of people have been evacuated, but both these reports say absolutely nothing about the shelters. So in the original report, we have an additional information which says that shelters are filled beyond capacity, but both the reports which we come across say absolutely nothing about the shelters. So in such cases, we would mark the report as partially verified because we are able to confirm the fact that a lot of people have been evacuated, but we have nothing to say about the condition of shelters. So such a report would get marked as a partially verified report.